Jannavi and today we'll discuss static factory methods in Java. But before going forward, we need to answer one question. What's wrong with constructors? So there are three things. The first one is no descriptive name. The second is they create a new instance every time. And the third one is they return instance of the same type. Now all these three things can be overcome using static factory methods. These are actually the advantages of static factory methods over constructors. So let us see all these three things in detail now. The first one is static factory methods have names. So here, for example, I have a class named diagonal. These are the members of the class. This is the public constructor and main method to create diagonal. Suppose I want to create a diagonal from bottom left to top right. So I will say diagonal 1. I'll call the constructor new diagonal, create instance and pass the parameters. Now let us say I want to create this diagonal from bottom right to top left. So in this situation also I have to say new diagonal and pass the parameter. So in both the cases the direction of the diagonal is different, but we have to call new diagonal. Obviously the parameters they will differ, but the name is new diagonal. It is kind of confusing because the direction is like we don't know the direction based on the name. So the name can be made more descriptive using static factory methods. Let us see how. So this is again class diagonal. We have members and constructor, and these two are static factory method. Now what is it? Static factory method, it is simply a static method that returns instance of the class. In this case it is returning instance of the diagonal class because this static factory method is part of the diagonal class. Now let's say we want to create this diagonal that starts from bottom left to top right. So we just have to call the static factory method, which is very descriptive. From bottom left to top right, we know the direction of the diagonal. Suppose if we want to create this diagonal bottom right to top left, again we will call the other static factory method from bottom right to top left, bottom right to top left. The names they are very descriptive, and both the static factory methods they in turn call the instance. They will create instance of the diagonal class. So the first advantage is clear. Using static factory methods the name becomes very descriptive, they are very clear. And one more privilege is we can now make the constructor private because the instance is created from the class. It is instance control. The instance of the diagonal is created from this static factory method. We don't need this constructor to be public anymore from some other class to access it. So, and constructors we know it should be as inaccessible as possible. So we got two things, descriptive name and a privilege to have private constructors using static factory methods. Let us go to the second advantage now. Static factory methods they reuse instances. Now what does this mean? This simply means let us understand this also with an example. I have a boolean example class here and these have two for loops. The first for loop, it will like both the for loops they will print boolean value true 5 times, but the way they are doing it, it is different. The first for loop it will create a boolean object using constructor new boolean true, new instance is created 5 times. Interesting is the second method. If you see this, it is calling boolean dot value of, it is some method, it is calling value of method of the built-in boolean class. Now what is this method? This is the implementation of that method. So when we are calling value of method here, it goes to this method of Java boolean class and it based on the parameter it returns true or false. What is true or false? These are static final variables, boolean variables. Obviously these are creating instance, new boolean. But the point to note is, in case of the first for loop, 5 times a new instance is created with value true, whereas in the second for loop it is calling a value of method which is a static factory method of the boolean Java class, and it is returning true or false. It is not creating the instance, new instance, rather it is creating the cached value which is already been present. So what is the advantage of caching and reusing the same value? The first one is performance. Creating object is resource intensive, and in case of frequent object creation scenarios it will obviously affect performance. Example, instead of 5, this is this value is this is a very huge value, so it is going to affect the performance in this case because we are creating the instance again and again, whereas in this case we are returning the cached instance every time. The second one is memory efficient. Reusing minimizes memory usage as fewer objects are allocated on the heap. The third one is instance control. This we already saw in case of the diagonal class, where we had the privilege to have private constructor because we were using static factory methods which was present inside the class. So static factory method, they give us the advantage to have to become instance control and manage the creation of the instances of a class. The last one, it makes the code more readable. This was the second advantage of static factory method. Now the third one is static factory method, they can return subtype, and Java map interface is a very good example of this. Let us see how. So here I have a main class. I am creating two maps, fruit prices and vegetable prices. Both I am creating using map.off method. In the first example I have one key value pair, and in the second one I don't have empty, I have 0 arguments. So but if you see in both the cases I am calling the same method, map.off. The difference is only the number of arguments that I am passing. Now this magic is possible because map.off, this is a static factory method of map. Now it returns an instance of a map based on provided arguments. Example, this map.off with one key value pair, it will call this method off, taking one key value pair, whereas this map.off with 0 arguments, it will go to this off method of empty map. Similarly, if we have had 3, this would have been good this thing, right? So based on the number of arguments, it is returning the type. This is the third advantage of static factory methods. Now we saw 3 advantages, but static factory methods have few limitations also. Let us see them. The first one is class cannot be subclassed with private constructors, obviously. So here I have a class person, private constructor, obviously because we have static factory methods and we will make the constructor private because we know constructor should be as inaccessible as possible. But now I want to create one more class, employee, and employee is a person, so I want to extend the person class, but to do that I cannot do it because of the private constructor. So if I want to extend the person class and if I want to create a new class employee, I have no option but to make this person class constructor protected. I'll still have static factory method, but the added advantage that we had of having the constructor private, now we don't have that because we want to extend the person class. So when we want to extend a class having static factory method, we need to change the constructor to at least protected. This is the first limitation. The second limitation is static factory methods, they are hard for programmers to find. Now what does this mean? So this is the documentation, Java documentation of the Boolean class. If I have to find the constructor of the Boolean class, it is very simple. It is just mentioned here, constructor Boolean. But if I have to find static method, static factory method, it is difficult. Even if I come to static methods, there are so many methods. How will I know which one is static factory method, right? Now we know this is value of because we saw it in our Boolean example. But for any random class, it is difficult because there might be many static methods present inside the class, but we don't know which is the static factory method. So there is a naming convention that should be followed for creating static factory methods, which is use these common names according to your use cases for creating static factory methods. Example, of, from, value of, create, all these things. For Boolean class we saw there is value of method. For map class we saw they use of method. So if we use this method, it is easier for others also to find and know that yes, this is a static factory method. So conclusion, consider static factory method instead of directly jumping to public constructors. Now if this way is difficult, start with a constructor first, and then if you think this can be changed to a static factory method, if the answer to this question is yes, always change it. Now don't go and change everything in your code base manually. IntelliJ has a very cool way of doing it. I will attach the link in the description. Check out that. And the static factory methods, we saw the advantages of this. I'll just summarize it. The first one is they have descriptive names. They cache and reuse instances, which improves performance, readability, memory usage, which makes instance control, and they have control on what type they return, right? So both constructors and static factories, they have their use cases, but static factories are great. They are awesome. Just consider them first, always. Thank you so much. I hope you liked the video and learned something new.